Hey guys, here is the tutorial for today's full watercolor portrait for our watercolor portraiture workshop. So you're going to be given in class a traced copy of this image, and you'll want to start by just reviewing the image that you have and the photo reference you'll be given. So these are traced, so they're not perfect. So you do want to sort of check your image against the reference to begin with. So just straighten out some of these lines if you can see them. And I've marked out here where the lightest and darkest areas are going to be. In watercolors, you need to have a plan before you start painting of how you're going to preserve the lighter areas. And more important than color is this idea of getting light and dark values correctly aligned. I've got my Analinky watercolors, which we'll be using in class, and which I've sort of explained how we're going to use. And we'll be creating our own two-tone brown. And the utility of creating your own brown out of two colors is that it gives you control over having a warm color and a cool color. So here we're going to be making a brown out of, and let me just move this little piece of paper over. We'll be making this out of purple and orange. If you're using watercolors at home, gamboge yellow, and so we're using orange here, gamboge yellow and quinacridone violet are a good analog of this combination, and they make lovely skin tones for this two-tone brown. So I'm going to start by mixing together the purple and the orange, making sure to clean my brush in between so that I don't get them mixed into each other's wells, because that will muddy things up quite a bit. And I'm going to dilute for this first layer until I get a color like this. So we don't want it too orangey, we want it to be fairly dilute. Now carefully, I'm going to move into my watercolor portrait and put down a wash of this lighter color. You may want to wet your paper very carefully first, avoiding any highlights, so avoiding the lightest areas, which are sort of coming down through the nose, a little bit around the eyes. So I'm wetting this down. There's a highlight right in the middle of the eyes that I'm going to avoid. You don't want your paper to be too wet when you wet it down. This is called sizing, because if it is, it means that the watercolors are going to sort of blend everywhere. The ideal wetness is just damp, just so that our watercolors are moving a little bit better than they would on dry paper. So I'm just wetting down all the areas that I'm going to be painting. I'm going to just dab that off so that the paper is just damp, just so it blends. And I'm going to come down with a flat wash for the first layer. So I'm going to be following the guidance of these marks that I've put down for this first layer and going over the marks that represent where the darker areas are. And with this first layer, I'm even going to go into the whites of the eyes. So the whites of the eyes aren't actually white. We tend to see them in context where they're reflecting light and color off of the spaces around them. So to make a really realistic portrait, you want to think about what the actual color of the eyes is. So just carefully moving along, trying to control the amount of water that you have on your brush. I'm also going to move into the lips, because the lips have a good deal of natural skin tone in them. Lips usually aren't all red unless someone is wearing lipstick. Usually a lot of the tone is similar to that you would find within the rest of the face. Moving into the eye. Again, I'm going to leave that little highlight alone. So there's a tiny little highlight I'm leaving alone. Got a little bit of darker color here on the side of the head. And then we'll move into the ears. So I'm just going to do a flat wash of color over the whole ear and then a flat wash moving into the neck. You can just see a bit of her hand, so I'm just going to put a little bit of color here just to represent her hands, but I'm not going to finish them because I don't want them to over-dominate the painting. I also want to move this color into her hair because we don't want a super sharp transition between her hair and the rest of her skin. We want a nice smooth transition here. Now as this layer dries, we're going to mix up our second wash. So this is going to be more concentrated than the first. I'm going to just mix up a more viscous amount of that purple and orange mixture. You can decide how warm or how cool you want it. I'm going to have it be a little bit warm. And this basically isn't as diluted as the other mixture. We're going to be placing this color along the second set of guidelines. If you find that your color when you start this is seeping into areas it shouldn't, take a break and use the hair dryer to dry your paper before coming in with this layer. So I'm just carefully following the guidelines for the darker areas. For the bottom of the nose, I'm going to add a little bit of water to my brush. Just blend some of these darker areas into the lighter areas. I can also blend some of this dark area kind of across the bridge of the nose before moving into a darker area just below the eyebrow. And so I'm just adding my water to my brush to make a graduated wash in the areas where I want a little bit more of a blend. moving into the lips, so I'm just using this to darken them up. I'm going to start to see that there's a little bit of a highlight in the area that's already been painted in. So not a true highlight, but where the light is bouncing off of the lip to make it a little bit lighter. The good thing about using this sort of two-tone brown mixture is that some areas of the skin are going to be warmer and some areas are cooler. We can make them warmer by adding more orange to our mix, or cooler by adding more purple. Usually the areas in the shadows are a little bit more cool than the areas that move close to the light. So I've added a little bit more orange to my purple mixture here as I move towards the lightest areas. So where you want areas to be even darker, just keep adding more purple to your orange purple mixture. And I'm going to move this color down into the neck. And I'll also add this to the ears. And finally, a little bit into the rest of the head. For areas where the texture is uneven, you can come back over with your brush with almost no water on it and just gently try to move those areas around to get more of a gradient effect. Just darkening up whites of the eyes. And I'm going to let that dry a little bit so that I can come in with crisper details where I need them. So I'm going to move on to the hands and come in with some darker colors in between the fingers. Before moving on to her white top. And for the white top, I'm going to mix together a little bit of both of the blues, so both ultramarine and cerulean blue. I'm going to add a ton of water to it, and then I'm just going to place this kind of bluish mixture in areas where there would be shade on the shirt. So I'm substituting blue for what you might think of as gray. Can also come in with some more condensed mixture of those two colors to create a little bit of the pattern on our shirt. And I'm leaving it sort of loose as you move down the page. So with watercolors, with painting in general, if you've chosen a tricky medium, such as watercolors for portraiture, it's nice to give your viewer sort of a glimpse of the fact that you are using watercolor by adding some stylistic flourishes here and there. I don't want to add too many blues to this composition, or they will make the face look a little bit too orange. But I do want to get a bit of a background. So I'm going to come in and start by wetting down the back of the page. So just anywhere outside of the face, being really careful not to get paint moving onto the face itself. And I'm going to make kind of a dull purple for the background. So I'm going to mix purple with a teeny tiny bit of black and then just dilute it. And the reason I'm adding the black is to bring the saturation down. If the background's too saturated, it could take away from the image. So I don't want that. So I'm just desaturating the color and moving in, dropping in the paint in a loose fashion. So I'm letting the paint just kind of dissolve off towards the edges of the page, just so that for the viewer there's a sense that this is watercolor. It's okay if your brush picks up other colors while you do this. Just for the background, this is just a little bit more loose. Now the interesting thing about our portrait and our light is that whatever the background is actually going to be bouncing off of the skin. So we're already using purple in the skin color, so this will work alongside this. But this is the interesting thing. The eyes are actually going to pick up a little bit of that color, the whites of the eyes. So I'm just going to add in some of that purple. I'm going to add a little bit of blue even to the purple and come in to get the whites of the eyes. And now if this is a little bit drier, let's see, it's okay, that's dry enough. I can come in with a finer brush for some more of the detail work. You have to be careful that it is very dry. But now with glazes, we can start to add a little bit more nuance to the color. So you want to start as simple as possible, focusing on tones before you start to focus on color. The lips have a little bit of a reddish tinge, so I'm going to just mix up some red, but it's kind of a cool red, so I'm going to add some purple to it to cool it down so it's not just a super bright red. And I'm going to carefully look at my reference and start shaping the lips. So you want to pay close attention to where the light is reflecting off of the lips here. You also want to be careful that this paint doesn't sort of pool up at the bottom of the lips, which could make an unintentionally darker area. I'm just going to tone down that highlight. So I'm going to just put a little bit of this red over the highlight because it's not quite that bright right there. I'm going to need a little bit more of that purple orange mixture, so I'm just going to mix up some more dark brown because I want to emphasize the contrast of the lower lip with the little shadow that forms right underneath it, because that shadow can be very distinctive from person to person. I'm going to start moving up into the nose. So I'm going to just use plain purple for the nostrils. Okay, a tiny bit of orange added to that. The nostrils are almost always smaller than you think they are, so they're not going to be huge. And there will be a little bit of darkness directly underneath the nose. I'm going to move on to the eyebrows before I move into the eyes. I'm being really careful around the eyes because, you know, that's where all the attention goes. And if they're not totally dry before we put detail in them, we risk really messing up the painting. Now, if the highlights are looking a little bit harsh, we can kind of tamp them down by making a mixture of the brown and a bit of yellow and a ton of water, so it's really dilute. And we can just sort of go around some of these just to bring down the intensity of those highlights. Just adding in more detail as I go along. And I'm going to move into the hair before I move into the eyes. I'm still being super cautious about the eyes. And I'm going to make the hair mainly purple. So just to add a little artistry to it. You can add more orange to it to make it more of a natural color if you'd like. I'm just going to come in and I'm just sort of using random brush strokes to get her hair in. So I'm kind of allowing the brush to kind of dance across the page. As I get closer to the face, I'll add in a little bit more orange. Another thing you can do with the hair to kind of create the impression of these soft curls is to lift out some areas of light. So just taking a paper towel, you can lift off little areas where the light would be hitting. I don't want her to look bald, and if I have those sharp little patches there, she'll look bald, so I'm just going to fill those in. Just going to extend her head back a little bit. And again, the further back I am, the more purple I'm using. Again, I'm just looking for everything I can do that's not the eyes while I wait for those to really dry. So I'm going to come in with the shadow in between her neck and her shirt. Adding more orange to that mixture as I move into the lighter areas. And there's a little bit of a shadow kind of right next to her neck and the shirt. It's always nice when a portrait there's a moment when it starts to look like someone. And that's always nice. So I'm just going to sharpen these edges, soften these edges here. Move into the lips. So the space right between the lips is usually quite dark. So I'm going to use the purple for that. And now, if I'm lucky, it will finally be time to move on to the eyes. So I'm just going to use the purple for the eyes. I'm going to start with the upper eyelid. Now I'm going to come in and get the iris, keeping that highlight alive and well. I usually don't put eyelashes in, but I'm just going to put a couple of shapes of eyelashes because it looks like she's squinting otherwise. So this will open her eye just a little bit. Moving on to the other eye, just using the purple. Anything else? Let's see, maybe this nostril here, maybe a little bit more darkness on one side of the nose, but then I think I can call it a day. Let's get this. Okay, and now the best part, which is taking the tape off. And there we have it, today's watercolor portrait. So I hope you enjoyed this and looking forward to seeing you next time.